Welcome back to Stationery at 4. As you can see, I'm back at the cabin, and I'm currently waiting for the cabin to warm up. I've got the wood stove lit, and I'm just trying to wait until the initial log, or the initial set of wood burns down a little bit so that I can get the wood stove nice and hot, and then close off some of the dampers and throw out some heat. In fact, it's a little bit chilly, so I'm just gonna throw on my blanket here. It's quite nice outside, actually. It's about 1 degree Celsius, maybe 0 right now. The sun just peeked out. And inside the cabin right now, it was sitting at -4, -5 Celsius. It's been quite the holiday season for me, and this is something that I do on an annual basis, which is I retreat. I do a bit of a solo retreat, and I come over to the cabin here, and I just take some time to disconnect from the world. This is an off-grid cabin. It's in the family. I don't personally own it, but I've got access to it, which is great. I used to come here quite a bit when I was younger, at least 3, 4, 5 maybe times a year. And now, just given the busy lifestyle that I lead, it's maybe twice a year at best. So anyhow, I digress. This video really is just an opportunity for me to take a few minutes to answer a question that's been coming up quite a bit, and I just started this YouTube channel about a year ago. So I've had a few folks who are interested in my take on journaling, and it's right at that time of the year, the holiday season. It's one of those things people tend to reflect on with respect to what are some of the new skillful strategies or habits I can put into place coming into the new year, and how do I take that forward? And journaling seems to come up quite a bit. And so I thought today I would take a few minutes to talk about why one would journal and how I personally journal, what my whole journaling setup is like. I've kept a journal for over 12, 15 years, a good chunk of my life, and I found it's been a really beneficial tool for me. And it's interesting because growing up there was quite a bit of stigma around boys keeping a diary or a journal. You got made fun of, and so I tended to keep it pretty hush-hush. But I find that, I would say, the present day and age, that stigma seems to be falling away, if not has fallen away, and keeping a journal for both women and men, or a diary, has become normal again. And I say normal again because it's interesting. Historically, some of who society would deem very successful people have kept a diary or a journal. Folks like Marie Curie, Oprah Winfrey, Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, Mark Twain, the list goes on and on, Frida Kahlo. The interesting thing about a journal or a diary is that a journal isn't necessarily a one specific thing. It could be anything. At the end of the day, a journal, or the definition of a journal or a diary, is to keep track of events of a personal nature, and that could be anything. It could be any events, and you could define it however which way you want. And so I find that for me personally, what I've kept track of, what I've written down, has changed quite a bit. And I think it's fantastic that more and more journals and notebooks and stationery is coming back into a bit more of a mainstream aspect in this day and age. And so there's more accessibility than there ever has been before, both in the fact that there's numerous YouTube channels out there and brilliant people on YouTube who are talking about why they journal or how they journal. There's also a lot of accessibility in terms of being able to buy notebooks and stationery. And when you get big bookstores who are trying to, I guess, capitalize on the idea of journaling, it does send an interesting message that this is normal and quite beneficial. So why does one journal? What is the whole point? Why would one journal? And it could be for a number of different reasons. It could be to reduce anxiety or stress, to work through things or process things. It could be to have a keepsake, a stash of your records and thoughts and feelings, perceptions, and being able to look back on them one day, or with respect to being able to pass that on as a keepsake for your children or for people who you would want to read about your life. The point I'm trying to make is it's kind of a documentation of all the various bits and pieces that made up you at one point in time. And it can be fascinating to go back and look at that. But when I talk about reducing anxiety and stress, it could also be really beneficial just if there's something that's bugging you, or if there's something that's bugging me. I find that I do well by writing it down and by what's bugging me and how it got to that point, and really just kind of working through, are there some strategies or things I can do to deal with that. And sometimes it just helps to write down that one is feeling a little bit overwhelmed or is going through some tough things, and it could help to confide in a personal place that only you have access. Not that I'm a big fan of this, but I do use this from time to time. If you're really angry at somebody, or if you really want to say something that's quite mean or hurtful, it helps sometimes just to write that all down. Just get it out of your system, so to speak. Perhaps you would take the opportunity not to say those things to the individual, or at least process it in a different way where you're trying to offer some constructive feedback and you can come at it a bit more skillfully rather than unskillfully. Another few reasons I personally keep a journal is it's a nice daily habit and structure I put into place for myself. It's something that I look forward to every day at the same time, and it really helps me to, or has helped me to, establish a routine in my life. And when I flip back on my journals, which I rarely do, and I'll talk about that in a bit, it really does allow me to see the growth, the transformations, the goals that I had set, whether I have addressed those specifically or not within the journals. It just helps to have that written down and just see how naturally my journal or my language has changed over time. And it's also funny sometimes to see what things haven't changed or what things I still get upset about or whatever that might be. I think the other thing that's really important for me in terms of journaling these days is there's just so much entertainment and media and things that can distract you really easily, or that you can give your attention to and your energy and effort to. And so when I find that I take those few minutes for journaling, it really allows me to recenter, refocus, and kind of gather my energy back a little bit and go, right, that's what I was trying to work on or achieve today. And sometimes it's just a stream of consciousness, just trying to get a few things out. And sometimes it's just trying to memorize or remember some really important events in my life. I also use my journal to be creative. I discovered my creativity quite late in my life, and it's a really funny and odd thing to say, and that's a story for another time. But I find that I'm really creative in my journal. I write down all my ideas, things that I do or may not do. Things like start a YouTube channel about stationery was an idea I wrote in my journal a year ago. It's things like that where I just get some of my ideas down, some of my crazy ideas which would never see the light of day, but at least it's there and it helps me kind of build and get creative. How does one journal? Well, I'll tell you that there's numerous ways to journal. There's numerous subtleties and specific things to you that you'll discover if you're starting out brand new to journaling, or if you're rediscovering your habit about journaling. I thought what I would do is just offer what has worked for me and how I journal. And some general bits of advice just to start off with. One, start with a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen. I think those are kind of the prerequisites. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy in terms of a pencil or a pen or the piece of paper. You could spend a lot of money on really nice writing instruments and really nice paper, but I don't think you need to. When I started out journaling, it was literally a $2 notebook and one of those Bic pens that you can buy for 25 cents. And that's how I started. And the more I got into it, the more I started playing around with, really expensive journals and really cheap journals, both in terms of the writing instrument as well as the type of paper. The most important thing about journaling, though, in terms of how, is to just get a piece of paper and a writing instrument and just start. The other thing that I tend to do in terms of general advice is to find a quiet space, find a space that's distraction-free. I think that really helps in terms of people who are discovering journaling or rediscovering journaling and coming back to it and trying to create a habit out of it, is just to find a quiet space. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, just somewhere in your house or in a coffee shop, wherever you find your 5 minutes of quiet time. That would be really helpful as well in terms of journaling. And one more thing about general tips with respect to journaling, it really helps to pick a specific time where you think you're going to be successful, because that will really, really help. whether that's early morning or late at night or at lunchtime, whatever that looks like for you, whatever it is. But being consistent about it on a daily basis really helps. If it's a weekly or a monthly thing, just finding the most beneficial day where you think you're going to be the most gung-ho about journaling or trying to maintain that habit is really helpful. So picking a date and time as well. Now, in terms of how I journal, I journal very early in the mornings because I tend to be at my most creative, inspired, also at my most poignant time with respect to trying to process things. And I tend to journal after I meditate, and meditation's a whole different thing. Whether you do it or not, it's not important, but this is just how I do it. After a few minutes of quiet time, I have the space, my desk in my room there, that is just my space for 20 or 30 minutes. That's how I tend to journal. And sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's 30. It depends on how much I want to say or write down and what I want to be talking about. Sometimes, so I talked about how I journal in the mornings. That's typically when I journal. Sometimes, if I have the energy and the time, I will journal at night as well, just to reflect on how my day went and things like that. In terms of the other aspect of how to journal, so what really works for me, and I find is really important in terms of my makeup, is just writing down the date. So the day, the date, whether you want to put the time or not, that's up to you. I find it doesn't really help for me. I find also having some journal prompts ready or at hand is really useful if you're just kind of sitting there going, I feel like I want to write, but I don't know what to write about. There are numerous journal prompts out on the internet. Just type in journal prompts into Google and you'll find a whole bunch. And what I do is I write down, I've written down a few that are really good for me, and I keep that in my portfolio just so that I can pull that out if I have that feeling I want to write, but I don't know what to write about. And that usually gets me going as well. The other thing that I tend to do in my journaling is run thought experiments. So asking myself the tough questions with respect to what would happen, and just posing a question to myself. What would happen if X were going to die? How would that affect your life? What would you do differently? How would you feel? And so these are some of the thought experiments I tend to run for myself just to see if I can work through that, if I can envision myself in that scenario. And if I can't, for whatever reason, and whatever that looks like, then being able to approach it with a sense of humility, a sense of understanding, and a sense of being at the ready for it. Not that you could ever be completely ready, but at least anticipating it a little bit to try and take the edge off, perhaps. So I run thought experiments like that. Some crazy ones like, what would happen if I were to win a $20 million lottery? What would happen if I were given free reign and access to all the writing instruments in the world? Which ones would I pick? You can write about anything and everything. Sometimes it's easy just to start. Sometimes it's really hard just to start. And so having a question that you can use as a prompt can be really helpful. The other thing that I've noticed really important for me is I can do stream of conscious journaling, which is just writing down whatever comes to mind. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that works for you, that's great. For me, I found that personally, I like to be a little bit more attentive to what I write down. So I take my time in thinking about it. I used to do the stream of consciousness stuff all the time, which is just write down again whatever was coming to mind. But I found that it was getting a little bit too frenetic and it wasn't really helping me process things. And that's just me personally. You could be different. I approach it now with a bit more of an intention, mindfulness, I suppose. And I really don't like the word mindfulness anymore. It's become such a buzzword. I like to use, things like attention or sustained attention, a little bit of focus, where I'm just really paying attention to this is what I want to write down and this is why I want to write down. And it really becomes kind of a natural process in itself. And there's a lot of intention behind it. And that's why I don't tend to reread a lot of my journal entries, because I spend so much time in the quote unquote present moment writing it down that I know very clearly why I'm writing it down. And when I look back, it's very quick for me to remember. So I don't tend to look at my old journal entries because I have a very clear idea of what I've written down, at least in the last week or last couple months. Sometimes I do tend to look back, like if it's a year, 2 years, 5 years ago type of thing, and just look at it from that perspective. And what I write in my journal is more about things that I'm grateful for, things that I'm trying to process or work through that might be stressing me out, or giving me a little bit of anxiety, things that are really beautiful to remember or make me happy to remember. I like to write those things down. And I do spend a bit of time in my journal trying to focus on the things that I'm growing on or building habits out of. I talked ever so briefly in my planner setup video about how I don't really believe in resolutions, but I do believe strongly in intentions and tweaking on a daily basis things that I've kind of set up my goals for. I find that really helpful in my journal to do that. Now, that's my big journal. I also have a 5-year diary that I've talked about in another video, which I've started last year, and I'm starting my second year this year. And those are just a few lines every day that I write down and keep track of memorable events. So I find that also helps in terms of being short, poignant, and very clear with what I'm doing or what I'm writing about, in addition to processing the stuff in my other journal. My fire just died out, so I'm going to go restoke that. As I said, you can keep a 5-year diary. You can keep a few lines a day type of journal. You could write pages and pages a day in terms of journaling, or a week or a month, whatever that looks like for you. But journals can be about anything, and it doesn't have to be such an inward look, although I think that's really neat and it works for me. But it can be about, your kids, your relatives, your friends, and keeping track of those things. It could be about your career, your personal goals, and just kind of keeping track of that. It could be about a garden and what you've made progress with respect to your garden. And so a journal can be about anything and everything. And I tend to find that I have a notebook for a lot of different things in my life. So, for example, some of the things that I'm really interested in learning right now are cross-country skiing and piano. So I've got a notebook dedicated to just that. And I write the date, and I write a little bit about cross-country skiing and some of the techniques, or what went well or what didn't go well. And then same thing with the piano. I've just started trying to figure out, where to even start. So I'll write about that. Overall, what I found in terms of how I've kept my journaling up over the last 15 years, it's been really beneficial, both in terms of creating a daily habit and daily routine and structure out of it for me, but also in terms of just being able to keep track of things, work through being overwhelmed, and keep a little bit more focus in what I want to do with my life and how I'm spending my time and my energy and what I'm looking forward to. Just to be really clear, it's very personal with respect to how you might journal in terms of how much you write or how little you write. I try to write a page a day, but sometimes I'll write 5 pages, 10 pages, and other days I'll barely get a paragraph down because that's all I need to write down. I think the point that I'm trying to make here at the end of the day is there's no fixed way to journal. It just is such a personal endeavor and a journey that one would take. And I think that that's part of the fun of it, is discovering how it might be beneficial to you, what you like about it, and being creative with how you tend to journal. What I will say is, if you're thinking about starting a journal, try it. Just like anything else in my life, if I'm interested in it, I love to try it out and stick with it for a period of time and see if it works. And if it doesn't, no harm, no foul. I think that's really important, to be creative with those endeavors and see what might work for you and what might not work for you. We're nearing the 20 degrees Celsius mark, and so I think I can lose the blanket and get to a little bit of solo time. Thanks very much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the support, the love, the feedback, the comments. They're great. Thank you. I really appreciate it. If you've got things that are really useful to you in terms of how you journal, would love to hear about it in the comments section below. I'm always looking for ways to tweak and try things differently. If this video was helpful in any way, shape, or form, please consider clicking on the like and subscribe buttons below. Take care, and bye for now.